The book Empowering the Performer describes an experiment that happened about 25 years ago, but it is still considered as being unique. Nobody else has done it, nobody else has attempted to push the experiment, so therefore there were a number of unanswered questions about what that experiment was about, who was involved in it, did it fail, did it succeed, and why is it important that people know about it. So first, it is information about what happened in that experiment, and secondly, what were the lessons, and then what are the chances that this experiment could now be implemented for permanent results and permanent structures, and we're talking of the performing arts. My work has focused very much after the Mauritian phase, where I was working on developing new forms of theatre for a new country. That was way back in the 70s. And then later on, I was invited across Africa to do different sorts of work as a director, as an expert, sometimes as an adjudicator in competitions, drama competitions, etc. But there was a unique meeting where African performers coming from different parts of Africa got a chance to sit down, do something together, because it was a meeting on theatre for development. And secondly, it was an opportunity to talk to each other, but more importantly, to listen to each other. And out of a unique coming together like this was born a union of African performing artists. The idea was it is such a rare opportunity for people from different blocks. You see, Africa is subdivided into linguistic blocks. So those blocks tend to create artificial islands. And that is one reason for underdevelopment. That is, there is no communication between those different blocks. So therefore, suddenly, there was an opportunity for performers to find out what was common in our problems, what was the phase of development in terms of expression, in terms of training, in terms of opportunities, in terms of what has Africa to say to the world. It is not only about, it's not only about the national concern. How do we develop the theatre for each individual country, but it is about how does each performer communicate to the rest of Africa, and how does Africa communicate with the rest of the world. So all these questions led to the need to have a forum. So we created a Union of African Performing Artists. And from there, what is the point of having a union if there is no program? So we ended up agreeing that what is required is training. The question was, what sort of training? Who's going to be in charge? Where is it going to be done? The experiment that the book talks about was called ArtUpDownTown, the African Center for the Training of Performing Artists. Now, during the whole period that project was researched across Africa, out of Africa, financed by the Scandinavians, supported by United Nations, and collecting support from America, from France, from the Netherlands, from Finland, from the African Union. The project at one point was supported, it was actually voted by all the ministers of culture of Africa as being the project for the World Decade for Cultural Development, which was 10 years that the United Nations proclaimed to develop culture as being one of the key aspects of development.
You know, people tend to mention cultural development a lot and use the word culture in many different things. From your own perspective, tell us exactly what is cultural development from your view.
You cannot develop a human being without his will. You cannot develop a country in dollars and in statistic figures. You need the contribution of the population concerned, and you need the full agreement of those who are supposed to benefit from development. So development is first in the head, in the heart, and in the will of a people to develop in order to achieve its potential. So culture is at the heart of development. If you take the example of England, for example, you see the Industrial Revolution was the result of a way of being, a way of thinking, a method of organization, a way of researching, engineering, for example. So you needed individual inventors, you needed the natural resources. So you see, for the United Nations to decide that we needed a decade to define cultural development is an indication as to the urgency of explaining that development is not only GDP, and it is not only about economy. It's about people. It's about real people. It's about the happiness of the
communities.
People. It's about communities. But it's about also the fulfillness, the fulfilling of one's potential at individual level, at community level, and also at the level of a nation. So that is what we're talking about when we say cultural development. It was important to understand that Africa is not a taker. Africans do not take, and Africans are not flattered to depend on others. So there is a major misunderstanding. So first, Africa is not a taking. Africa is a continent that has a lot to offer. So it is a giving culture. And we need to remind ourselves of that. The problem is, first of all, that the image, it's about the image of Africa. It is about who is going to tell the story of Africa. It is about how do we tell the story of Africa. Because the need to tell the story of Africa, the real and full story of Africa, is in itself an experiment that might take more than one generation. There is a need for that. To tell about the success story in industry or in terms of agriculture or in terms of political stability is wonderful. But how is the story of Africa going to feed into the mind of the young of Africa? How is the world going to understand that Africa is only waiting for the opportunity to make a major contribution? How and when is the world going to recognize that Africa has been giving all the time, but without getting the recognition for it, and without getting the benefits, you see, of the constant contribution that is always relegated as being indirect?
In order to takers.
Yes.
Right. Why is it that Africa was once known as one of the richest land, so to speak, and when we see these visuals now in the Western world, it shows that the opposite of that?
You know, Africa, The reality is exactly the opposite. I consider that Africa is the reserve of the world. Africa has surplus in terms of gold, in terms of diamond, in terms of cobalt, in terms of copper, in terms of silver, in terms of land, in terms of uranium. The raw material of the world are in reserve in Africa. My contention is that the performing arts is another form of raw material. But while the other resources have been exploited by others for the benefit of others, and Africa has been left with hunger and fighting over the leftovers, the performing arts is a matter for Africans to harness, to process, and to benefit from.